Chapter 6. Rules 14 to 21. 888, CWL, Rule 14 is once more a comment by the Chohan, not so much upon what has gone before as in preparation for another set of 3 aphorisms, which are numbered 15, 16 and 17. 889, 14. Having obtained the use of the inner senses, having conquered the desires of the outer senses, having conquered the desires of the individual soul, and having obtained knowledge, prepare now, O disciple, to enter upon the way in reality. The path is found, make yourself ready to tread it. 890, it seems strange when we are past the middle of the second part of this book to be told that only now are we entering upon the way in reality. It is, of course, a higher stage of the way that is referred to. Just as we speak of the probationary path first, and then the path proper after the first initiation has been passed, so here the Chohan speaks of entering upon the way in reality. The same idea is applicable at different levels. The Arhat enters on a new way, that of the Nirvanic plane, a greater reality than that of the Buddhic plane, and the Aseka or full adept enters a yet higher path, a still fuller reality. 891. There seems no end to this path. We cannot speak with certainty as to anything final. We can say that the ladder reaches before us till it is lost in glory far beyond our understanding, and we know quite certainly that there is evolution before us lasting for millions of years yet. What is the final end, who shall say? But that we shall reach the consciousness of our solar logos, we know. For us that might well seem an end, yet I have no doubt that beyond that stretch further glories, but as to the finality we can say nothing. Even if such things could be laid before us in our present stage of development, it is quite certain we should not understand them. 892. When the Chohan speaks of having conquered the desires of the individual soul, he means the desires which the ego himself may have. They are not such as we term desires down here. At a high stage of the path 2 fetters must be cast off which are called ruparaga and aruparaga, and they are interpreted desire for life in a form and desire for formless life. When one reaches the consciousness of the ego, one finds that he has before him 2 varieties of life, that in his causal body, which is life in a form, and the Buddhic life, which is life without a form in any ordinary sense of that word. 893. The ego has thus experiences of a consciousness in a form and a consciousness without form, and they are both wonderful beyond all words, because the ego's life in form is life among his peers, among other egos. And when he is conscious at that level, he is enjoying the companionship of all the brightest intellects that the world has ever produced, including the great angel kingdom as well as the human kingdom. The life of the ego on his own plane is glorious beyond any conception possible to the personality. If one could imagine an existence in the company of the great men of the world, artists, poets, scientists, and even our masters themselves, and add to all that an understanding of them unattainable down here, then only would one begin to have some idea of the life of the ego. 894. When one advances that far in development, one can see that it is a life of intense attraction, and for a man having that possibility before him to put it all aside and say, I have no longer the slightest desire for this, would be a stupendous sacrifice. 895. It would be an even greater renunciation if beyond and above that he had the formless life at his disposal, the life on the Buddhic plane, which has not only that companionship, but actually becomes one with all that. And with a great deal more. Then he would say, I have no desire even for that life, I am absolutely free from desire. If the Logos sends me, through our masters, into one of these lines, life in form or life beyond form, most happily, most gratefully will I accept the work and try to do my best, but I have no desire for one or for the other. And am equally willing to be sent down into physical plane work. I suppose few people have the least idea what an awful plunge the physical plane life is after such experience. To come down to this lower level even under the most desirable conditions, the most beautiful surroundings, is to fall back again into darkness out of a marvelous light. It is to be confined, to be bound and helpless, because all the faculties of the higher worlds are so fine that they cannot be used down here. 896. It was said in one of the earlier letters from the Masters, of those who had touched the nirvanic level, that when they came out of it they were in a condition of profound depression for many weeks. I can imagine that to be true of some of our Indian brothers who in high ecstasy, in samadhi, had experienced that, and on coming down again to the physical life had found it a condition profoundly depressing. Those who are pupils of the Masters and have had experience of the higher levels have been taught not to allow themselves to be depressed by descent into any limitation or surroundings. 897. He who has sacrificed himself for service must be willing to surrender everything completely, when it is necessary. He must be ready to be sent down into any kind of surroundings, to give up altogether for the time that life in the higher forms and that formless life which is higher still. Only so can he cast off entirely those two fetters. It is the Arhat who has to do this. One may gain the fourth initiation and yet have touches of desire for those higher realms, so we need not despair unnecessarily. But it does mean a high development, a strong sense of the necessity for service, to be entirely unattached to such bliss. The temptation is very far beyond anything one could possibly imagine. 898-15. Inquire of the earth, the air, and the water, of the secrets they hold for you. The development of your inner senses will enable you to do this. 899. In this rule we have the original aphorism in the first sentence and the Chohan's comment in the second. I have already spoken with regard to what is indicated here, that we have to come into closer communion with nature, if we want really to understand her. All religions so far as we know, even including many of the rites of savage tribes which can hardly be thought of as religions at all, have a theory of cosmogony, of the way in which the world or the solar system came into being. There is a reason for that. It has been strongly impressed by the world teacher upon the subraces of people to whom he came at different times that they should try to understand the universe of which they form a part. 900. The more we understand of the whole plan of evolution, the more we can live in harmony with it, and become able to work with it even in minute detail. I am afraid it is impossible for people who have not had the experience fully to grasp all that is meant here by coming more closely into touch with nature. The writer is not talking vaguely, but with very perfect and intimate knowledge, when he says, "Inquire of the earth, the air, and the water, of the secrets they hold for you." Those secrets would help men to understand this great and wonderful evolution. Even a little knowledge of them would at least save people from the danger of being self-centered. Many people very distinctly have been self-centered, because they have the absurd idea that all these kingdoms were created especially for mankind. If there are vegetables, well, it is stated in the Bible that God gave them to man for food. If there are animals, they assume, although I do not think it is distinctly stated, that God intended them to be man's servants, that they exist only to serve him, and, apparently, many of them, only to be eaten by him. That is not what is stated in the Bible. It is the herbs and fruits of the trees which are there said to have been given to man for his meat. There has been very strongly this idea that everything existed for the sake of man, that the air was made that he might breathe it, that the water existed that he might use it to drink or to wash with. And that everything pivoted round man as a center. But all that is not so by any means. 901. The same people think of the moon as useless, except to light their way at night. If that was the intention, it has been very inefficiently carried out, because half the time it does not do that at all, but still they persist in saying that the sun exists to light them by day and the moon to light them by night. Men have always talked like that, and when we know the facts it certainly strikes us as curious. We are the highest of the animal evolution. We hold ourselves to be a kingdom apart from the animal, but the fact remains that we are the highest of these creatures which have dense physical bodies. There are vast numbers of entities higher than ourselves who have mental and astral vehicles, and others which use physical bodies to the extent of the etheric matter, though only during temporary materialization. 902. If we were to choose one evolution apart from the rest and say that the solar system exists for that special one, or even to say that our Earth exists for that one alone, then we should have to take the great Deva evolution rather than the human, because it certainly reaches much higher and is altogether more splendid than our own. There are a great many other lines which have finished their physical experience on other chains of worlds and are now utilizing the higher planes of this world. Those evolutions which are at the stage of the Buddhic plane, for example, do not interfere at all with the three lower worlds in which we are evolving. Since they are already at that height where their lowest level is the mental plane, which to us is so high, it may well be that they are far more important than we. 903. So far as we have been able to test it, or to see, no space anywhere is being wasted, or is unoccupied. I remember a statement made once at a spiritualist meeting which I attended, before I knew about Theosophy. The communicating entity said that to his sight the room was packed densely with what he called spirits, and furthermore beyond that room there extended on into the sky a dense mass of higher entities, whom he called angels, of various sorts. Pouring down and rising up again. He said, the whole air, as far as I can see, is densely packed with these higher beings. He represented them all as being focused upon the particular circle in which we were sitting, and I have no doubt that a certain set of entities may have been attending to that, but apart from that, and always. All space is being utilized for evolutions which have nothing to do with us or with our set of parallel schemes at all. 904. The whole of space is absolutely full of life. More than 3/4 of the earth is covered with water, men cannot live in it, but that vast space is nevertheless very fully occupied with life. The solid earth is also full of a kind of life that moves through it as we move through air, without being conscious of obstruction. That is at a level lower than humanity. It is cleverer in some ways, but on the whole lower, and so utterly different from ours that what is their normal evolution would be evil for us. Much of this life could not be explained in ordinary language at all, but one can sense it by getting away from one's body and going in among it and observing it. I should not advise people to do this, however, until they have the higher faculties and the other qualities which have been mentioned, because they might get themselves into serious danger. Especially among these lower forces which are tremendously strong, but are not guided by any considerations which we understand. What we would call moral considerations do not exist at all among some of those evolutions. It is all quite different from anything of which we have any knowledge, but all this we must know before we ourselves can reach the level of the divine and become one with that. Because all of this is the life of the Logos just as much as is the life within ourselves, and to understand him we must understand it all. 905, 16. Inquire of the holy ones of the earth of the secrets they hold for you. 906, the comment upon this is. 907, the conquering of the desires of the outer senses will give you the right to do this. 908. The holy ones of the earth are certainly, among others, our masters. I think that here he means also the great angels. We may come into touch with them and may learn much from them, but also we have learnt, much from our own masters, for they, through their disciples, have taught us much knowledge which otherwise we should have been a long time in reaching for ourselves. They told us in the beginning that it was our business to verify for ourselves the things they taught us. That is what we have been doing, and it is in that way that we have in many of the later Theosophical books much more detail than was given in the earlier books, which depended very largely upon what had been told us. 909. To inquire from a master does not always mean to go and ask a question. There are other ways besides that. There are cases in which we have done precisely that thing. We have formulated definite questions, and when the opportunity occurred have put those questions, one might say by word of mouth, except that on the higher planes there is no word of mouth in the ordinary sense. We have sometimes put those questions to a master in a moment of his leisure and have received definite answers to them. There are many things in everyday work about which we should like to have the benefit of his wider insight, yet we could not think for a moment of troubling him to give an answer. As has been explained before, it is possible for a pupil to lay his thought beside that of the master and so, without appealing to the consciousness of the master to see what he thinks on any given subject. 1 Ante, Volume I, Part 1, ch. 1, The Occult Path, Part 2, ch. 4, Be True All Through. That makes no call upon him whatever. It is simply that by drawing back up the line of communication we can put our thought beside his. It means that one has oneself thought out the question first and come to some conclusion that seems the best, then one lays that conclusion beside the master's thought on the subject, to see whether there is any difference. If there is, one promptly alters one's own thought, knowing that he is much wiser and that his thought is accurate. 9-10. Thus there are ways of consulting the master, without troubling him at all. Still, there are other cases where that is not a suitable method of communication, where we have absolutely to wait for an opportunity to ask a question and get an answer. But certainly in order that one may inquire of them he must first of all bring himself to the point where he will cause no disturbance in coming near to them. 911. It is the duty of some of us to go every night when we fall asleep to the houses of our respective masters for orders, to see whether there are any special instructions for us. Sometimes there are. But sometimes we find the master obviously busy, deeply engaged, then we do not thrust ourselves upon his notice, but go quietly away and go on with our ordinary regular work. Any pupil, of course, would do that. He would study first the master's convenience, and when he considered that he had something important to report he would not think of himself, but of the master. But sometimes newer recruits are very full of the importance of something that they have been doing, or that they want to ask, and they wait about and thrust themselves on the attention of the master, so that he turns aside for a moment from what he is doing. 9-12. The older pupil is always most careful as to what sort of thought and feeling he sends along the lines of communication between himself and the master, so that there shall be no slightest jar. This needs a certain amount of care on the part of the pupil, because there are very often jars which the pupils cannot help. In a great city, for instance, there must often be surroundings which are very unpleasant. In a crowd during the busy time of the day, in the midst of a perfect pandemonium of noise, all sorts of clashing and crashing vibrations impinge upon a person to some extent. One may guard oneself to some degree, and must indeed take good care that no such vibrations, if they do affect one, should be transmitted to the master. 1 Andy, pages 187-8. It is not that the master could not deal with it all by a single thought, but one does not want to cause him a single thought. His time is so precious, the outpouring of his force so valuable, that the pupil does not want the smallest amount of it to be wasted. He lives for the work, as the master does, and it is part of his duty to see that the very great beneficence which his guru has extended towards him in making him an outlying part of himself, does not cause the least trouble. It is easy to prevent these disturbances from reaching him, when one has reached the stage of knowing how to do it. In the meantime, it is the conquering of the desires of the outer senses that gives one the right to come into such touch with the masters that he can inquire from them. 9:13-17. Inquire of the inmost, the one, of its final secret which it holds for you through the ages. 9:14. The inmost, the one, for the personality, is no doubt the ego, but for the ego it is the monad. What it is for the monad I do not know certainly, because I cannot yet see the monad. One can see the triple Atma, which is the threefold manifestation of a monad, and from that a great deal may be deduced, but face to face I have not seen it. Our masters have, but what they see and what they know they cannot fully tell us, that is quite clear. The monad is said to be a spark of the divine fire, but also we believe that in the primal manifestation of the system the Logos poured himself out through his 7 ministers, the 7 spirits before the throne of God. I do not know, but I imagine, that for the monad, who must have come out through one of those glowing colors on his way from the divine fire, that great minister or planetary spirit through whom he came forth might well be the inmost, and so we reason on to yet higher beings. These things are not comprehensible to us, and not to be stated in words. In some way which means very little to us and yet in meditation may mean a great deal, God puts part of himself down into matter, and divides that part so that it becomes spirit and matter, 2 manifestations of the same thing. And yet having done that he remains behind it all, unlimited, omnipresent, unaffected. The inmost, the one, has held secrets for us through the ages because always from the very beginning the inner self, the monad, has known certain things. We do not know what things the monad knows from the beginning. The monad is a spark of the divine fire, and the logos, who is the divine fire, knows all. 915, the comment on the 17th rule says. 916. The great and difficult victory, the conquering of the desires of the individual soul is a work of ages, therefore expect not to obtain its rewards until ages of experience have been accumulated. When the time of learning this 17th rule is reached, man is on the threshold of becoming more than man. 917, that sounds rather excessive, but we must presume that he who writes knows whereof he writes. We must remember that all this has to be taken at two levels. When it is a question of the desires of the personality and of their being laid aside in favor of the aspirations of the soul, it surely is not such a difficult matter. Putting aside the desires of the individual soul for those of the monad behind is a very much higher thing, and when it is said that it may take ages, one is prepared to admit that it might well be true. And yet when you have once accomplished this at one stage, to do it over again at another and higher stage ought not to present any insuperable difficulty, because what has to be done is the same thing, though from an entirely different point of view. It will, no doubt, take ages for those who slowly tread the broad main road of human progress, but generally only a few lives, as we have seen, for those who now enter the path, and breast the mountainside. 918. When one gets a glimpse behind the veil into the plans of the hierarchy, one finds that they habitually talk in large figures. They lay their plans with a wonderful, almost deadly, certainty, and it would seem that nothing whatever can interfere with them. They lay out their future in blocks of 10,000 years or so, and they say, in this 10,000 years we will get such and such work done. And they do it. Yet that work does not at all necessarily spread itself evenly over that block. It seems to me, from what I have observed, that there might be a plan laid out in which a certain amount was to be done in the first 200 years, so much in the next, and so on. So that by the end of 1,000 years a certain definite goal was to be achieved. It would seem that in those smaller divisions of 200 years the prescribed proportion of work is not always achieved, yet what they have calculated to get done in the course of the larger block of 1,000 years is always done. When the work moves slowly at first, it hurries in the end. 919. The people or the nations to whom the opportunity to do the work is first offered do not invariably take it, but there is always an understudy being prepared. If a man or a nation fails, the next line is brought up and the work is done, though it may be delayed a little. The British Empire had a trial of that nature in connection with the Great War. As a whole it rose to the emergency and proved itself worthy. Had it not done so, another great nation was being prepared to take its place, but it would have done the work a century or two later, because it is a long way behind. Now, because we have so far risen to our opportunity, and I hope we shall continue to do so till the end, that other nation will have a longer time to develop, and therefore will progress more soundly, more easily, and will not have such a strain put upon it in its development as it would have had if we had failed. 920. The Theosophical Society, and also each member in it, is in a somewhat similar position. Any member who proves himself good in the general work, or shows signs of being good in the near future, will be tried with some of the efforts which are being made in connection with the founding of the sixth subrace of our Aryan race. In all this there is, of course, no conscription or compulsion, all will evolve to perfection sooner or later, and we can take just as long as we like. The wisest policy is to do the very best we can in a steady way, not putting ourselves under a strain which we cannot permanently endure. It is a considerable advantage in doing any of this work to know to which of the rays one belongs. Most of us in the Theosophical Society are on one of the 5 rays, numbered 3 to 7, but many are in process of transferring themselves to the first and second rays, in order to work under the 2 great masters who founded the society, and who are to be the Manu and Bodhisattva of the 6th root race, which will be established in some 700 years' time. Many of our people will be born into that race, but there are others who will prefer to work on in the 5th race, and help in bringing it to the perfection that is still before it. Others will prefer to go with the great geniuses who will certainly come into the 5th root race at its highest point, rather than to follow the 2 masters into the pioneer work of the new race. 921. In Australia and America, and some other places, there is now a special opportunity for those who wish to help in the development of the sixth subrace, because it is rapidly coming into existence there. While there are only isolated members of it in the older countries. Many of those who were killed in the Great War have already been reborn, though there is nothing so far to indicate that they are abandoning their former countries in order to come to the newer lands. Those of the new race type who remain in the old countries will probably have more difficulties to face than the others, because of the pressure of old ideas and conservative customs. 922. In all these undertakings, no one is ever indispensable. As to our own Theosophical movement, we may be very sure that the great ones behind will take care of it as a whole. Only lately, since I have had to take up again a good deal of church work, I have found how very closely that organization is being directed. How very intimate may be the relation between those who guide the church down here and the real head of the church behind, if those who are working down here make themselves channels such as they should be. That in many cases they have not done so, but have worked for their own selfish power and interest is lamentably true, and those who have done that have thereby shut off from themselves a vast tract of spiritual power, usefulness and efficiency which they might have had. But it is only quite lately that I have found out how tremendous are the possibilities and how ignorant most people are of them. And I am quite sure from what I have already seen that the same thing must be true in many other quite unsuspected directions. 923. I shall never again be surprised to find traces of the work of the Great White Lodge in anything that is good anywhere, whether it be small or great, for they miss no opportunities, not even the smallest. Wherever there is anything of good in any movement, just to the extent of that good it is being utilized. There may be much in the movement that is not good. That is regrettable, and that has to be put aside, but it does not appear to interfere with their employment of every ounce of good that does exist in it. There may be bigotry, persecution, pride, self-seeking and many other qualities that are undesirable in some movement or person. 30 years ago I might have thought that those qualities would probably prevent their possessor from being utilized at all. They do stand seriously in his way, and prevent him from making any real progress, but if there is any good quality in that person, to the extent of that good quality he is being used. 924. This method of the Brotherhood is most encouraging. We are all very conscious of being so far from perfect ourselves that we might perhaps think, how can a master make use of anything in me, when I so often make mistakes? But it is our duty to do our best, and then whatever there is of good in us he will use. At the same time this lays upon us a still greater duty, to get rid of that which makes it difficult for him to use us. He will use us as much as he can. Let us make it easy for him by making ourselves perfect channels. 925. There are many lines of development for human beings, and it takes many lives to develop the characteristics of any line perfectly. I have spent most of this life in developing the psychic side of my nature, in learning how to see clairvoyantly, and writing about it. I met in our society, and have worked with, Sir William Crookes. That man spent his life in the study of chemistry, and he knew it perfectly. Over and over again I have felt, if only I had your knowledge, or if you had my clairvoyance, what work we could do. It seems a pity that one cannot have in one life both these forms of development. It takes a lifetime to attend to each. He spent his life studying chemistry. And he will come back into his next incarnation not with the detailed knowledge but with the faculty that will pick all that up almost automatically. I have spent this life in developing the psychic side. I do not know how much I shall be able to transmit into my next body, but I will carry over as much of it as I can. Then I will start along one of these other lines, if the work will permit me to do so. But in the meantime those who are willing to do our special work are set to do it, and we have not much time for other things. We must attain all things one by one, they will come, because we do not lose one when we drop it and take up another. So if in this life we happen to have the Theosophical development, then in the next life the opening up of the intellect and of high devotion may come much more easily because in this life we have had this training. And there will be the further great advantage that we shall be practically certain not to misuse them when we get them. 926. We must push on rapidly. we may be much nearer than we know to the higher development. If we have to spend a life or two in acquiring those capacities, what is that? There is plenty of time before us, so let us set our aim high, and try to develop all we can in the way of spirituality, intellect and inner knowledge. We are digging through a wall of ignorance and prejudice that we have built round ourselves in the course of many lives. We are like a man trying to escape from a prison. He goes on digging. He does not know at what moment the pick will go through the wall. When the reward is due it will come suddenly. We have many things yet to attain, but perhaps the development will come quickly. For that we must follow in their footsteps and learn what they would have us learn. 927, Rule 18 is once more a comment by the Chohan. It warns the aspirant never to lose his caution and watchfulness, but always to be afraid of himself, as a Roman philosopher put it, even though he has ceased to be afraid of anything else. 928:18. The knowledge which is now yours is only yours because your soul has become one with all pure souls and with the inmost. It is a trust vested in you by the Most High. Betray it, misuse your knowledge or neglect it, and it is possible even now for you to fall from the high estate you have attained. Great ones fall back, even from the threshold, unable to sustain the weight of their responsibility, unable to pass on. Therefore look forward always with awe and trembling to this moment, and be prepared for the battle. 929. That great ones fall back even from the threshold seems impossible. The more nearly you approach their level the more incredible it appears, because anything like selfishness would seem quite impossible to the man at that stage. However, it must be so, because it is said by one who knows that of which he speaks. The thought of self is very subtle and turns up in unexpected guise at levels where there should be no such thing. Therefore we shall do well to heed the warning, and not too soon think that we are safe from the attacks of selfishness. That is the only fetter that can hold us back, but it has many forms, and is very subtle indeed. 930. The last three aphorisms once more form a series. In number 19 there is a preparatory comment by the Chohan. 931:19. It is written that for him who is on the threshold of divinity no law can be framed, no guide can exist. 932. The disciple at this stage is utterly beyond the need of outside teaching. He has read the book of nature on all the 5 planes of human evolution. He is at the point of conquest of the last fetter, avidya. Henceforth the law of his life comes utterly from within himself. Therefore no comment is possible. Says the Chohan. 933, yet to enlighten the disciple, the final struggle may be thus expressed. 934, then come the 3 rules. 935. Hold fast to that which has neither substance nor existence. 936:20. Listen only to the voice which is soundless. 937:21. Look only on that which is invisible alike to the inner and the outer sense. Peace be with you.